Okay, thank you and welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. Ask if members have any declarations of interest. No. There's no substitutions. Councillor Mason is expected to join us shortly. Councillor Burton as well. So, if we move on then to the minutes of the last, I think we've got a couple of sets of minutes. So, if there are any issues anybody's got with those, otherwise, happy to sign them.
One comment that there's an issue I'd like to draw in from the second set of minutes, however they're drawn in, and having talking to Bryn, it's his view that it's best taken as part of a governance report, which he will be due to produce. But it is an issue that I think needs to be taken fairly seriously by members of the Audit Committee, and indeed more widely by the council members, about how Audit Committee members function in their roles.
Okay. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I did want to suggest an amendment to the second set of minutes because I do think it is pertinent, and I don't want to open the door on the point just made. But it was a point that was stressed at that meeting that it was cross-party support in the Constitution Working Group, and there was independent support at that meeting. So I think it should be reflected in the minutes as a point of accuracy. I don't want to open that kind of worms because I know what that might look like, but I think it is an important point in terms of what was discussed at that meeting.
Sorry, so what amendment are you suggesting specifically?
It talks about during discussion, it was acknowledged that, and there's a bunch of things in there about how it was reviewed in the Constitution Working Group. So I think talking about the fact that it was considered and recommended by Constitution Working Group, it's worth adding specifically in that there was cross-party support at the Constitution Working Group. Ditto after the substantive point around the discussion, it talks about how the vote went. Obviously, our independent members can't vote, but it was recommended by, and I think it's worth pulling that point out as well.
Well, I mean, you could add cross-party to the Constitution Working Group in the sort of third paragraph down on the second page, but I mean, we all know it's cross-party anyway. That's fine by me to add. It's not particularly relevant to the point that was being made in terms of
it doesn't change the substantive outcomes. Obviously, I'm thinking of what happens when online videos disappear, etc. This is the only summary of what happened, so it's just worth calling that point out.
Yeah. Okay. Add those words. Otherwise, any other issues?
Very brief one. By the in public participation, Mr. Mendes recommended that we watch the agenda and webcast on the 28th of September 2016 Audit Governance Committee. I tried to do that. It's been deleted from the website, so we can't do that. If it's considered to be important, is there any chance it could be reinstated so we can actually see what we was recommended to look at? Looking at okay, right, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Manning.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a question about the paragraph at the top of page 14, where it says it was proposed that Article 11 be further amended, because I wasn't sure what the further amendment was. From the minutes, it's not clear what was an amendment and what was a further amendment.
So if I can, Chair, the further amendment was the amendment being discussed at the time. So the original amendment, if you recall, was taken through council in November 2023. So there was an amendment made to the terms of reference of staffing matters and urgency. This was then a further amendment to that Article 11.
But all of the Constitution is reviewed periodically and has been since it was first instituted, first introduced. So is every amendment we ever make a further amendment?
Technically, it would be. Nothing hangs by it. You are welcome to take the word further out.
I found it just slightly confusing. That's
makes
me.
Take that out. Okay, anything else? Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Just because it says that I was present at that particular meeting on the 20th of March, however, I was not, and I sent a substitute who was Councillor Kelly, I believe.
Oh.
Okay. Okay, anything else? Okay. If we can move on to, obviously, there's no public participation speakers registered for this meeting. So if we move on then straight to item 4, which is the corporate governance performance report. Sorry.
Yeah, so I've got some points on the action log. They're not really the minutes and they don't always seem to fit into the agenda as a clean item. So is that the right time to do it? It's under the minutes, really.
Yeah, we go now.
They're all relatively brief, but they're all asking for updates, basically. The first one is action 40, which is about the constitution of the combined authority. And it doesn't have any, next status or TBC timing or whatever, but given the evolution that we've seen of the combined authority, I wondered if we should be closing that action imminently or what needs to be done for it.
What page is that on? They're in a weird order.
Sorry, it's on page 16. Hopefully. Row 40.
So if I can, Chair, I think the reality is now that the combined authority has adopted its constitution, has a mayor and is now into its own sort of battle rhythm for reviewing that through its own procedures, there's probably not a lot more that we can do at this stage.
That was my assumption, is that we can close that action off because they now own the constitution reviews from this point onwards, but wanted to check that. My only other question was, there was a point further down around the action plan on no purchase order, no pay, and there was a point of consideration for when an appropriate time would be to receive an update. It's not in the future plan bullet point when we get to that item on the agenda. So just wanted to call out that I haven't seen an update on when that might come back to us, but I don't know what the actual actions agreed are. So it'd be good to make sure that doesn't get lost in the mist.
We'll take that away and bring an action date back for you.
Okay, there's no further points on the action log. So I was reminded we were going to move the external audit section up to the beginning of the agenda, just to help our external sort of participant. That's okay. Sorry, that's item 7. Just move straight on to that one then.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
In usual fashion, I'll take the report as read. And I'll just give a bit of an explanation in regard to the auditor's annual report. It's intended to provide you with an update on the work that we've completed in the financial year. And it's also intended to be read by a wider audience, not just members and officers. Due to delays in finalising our audits, we had intended the report to cover both 21-22 and 22-23. However, we're still working on the 22-23 audit because we need some assurance from the pension fund auditor to be able to finalise that. But the commentary within the report is likely to be what we issue for 22-23. Bit confusing, but yes, it's where we are. Section 3 of the report provides our commentary on your value for money arrangements, covering financial sustainability, governance, and the 3 E's. As you can see, we've raised several other recommendations, and on page 22 of the report, we've provided an update on a previous significant weakness in arrangements in regard to the public interest report. And you'll have noted that we've closed that in 22-23. We think you've got the arrangements in place now. So I don't propose to say anything else on the report other than to ask if you've got any questions.
Okay, and are there any questions? No, Councillor Milling.
Thank you, Chair. There's a couple of issues where recommendations were made as a result of the 2021-22 audit, and then those recommendations hadn't been acted on. The same issues were present in the 2022-2023 audit. Would you usually put timeframes on those recommendations, or is it because they're recommendations, not requirements? Would you not necessarily expect them to be remedied by the following financial year? I'm looking at page 138 and 139, where there was some recommendations in relation to the reconciliation of the trial balance, the comprehensive income and expenditure account, and some recommendations about journals and recode journals, and the recommendations weren't implemented by the following year.
So that section of the report is effectively a copy of the audit completion report in regard to the financial statements audit. And the two recommendations that you have mentioned there did follow into 22-23 as well, and will be included in the ACR for 22-23. We don't put a timeline on it, but we'll keep reporting it until it goes away.
Sorry, do you have another question, Councillor? No? Any other questions?
Chair, I could just make a comment. If the external auditor won't put a timeline on it, in theory, the audit committee could take a view, they would like a timeline to be put on it. I.e., it's an internal issue for the organisation, but it's something that the external auditor now flagged 2 years in a row. And it would be embarrassing if we flagged it 3 years in a row. It's a bit embarrassing at 2 years in a row.
Is that something that's possible to speak to, whether it's useful to add in? Or, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll pick that up. We'll always report on it. We'll pick that up. Sorry, we'll pick that up with Debbie as well as part of the 23-24 audit. And we'll report back to you on that as well.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just saying, should there not be an intervention at this stage, i.e. the audit committee has been made aware of something, an audit committee member has highlighted it, checked it out with the external auditor, and he said, yeah, it's a bit odd. If he were to be coming back and saying it's still a bit odd in the next year, then that is an internal issue which the audit committee ought to be pushing back, I believe, to the staff responsible internally, be it the finance director or anything else.
Councillor Mellon?
I mean, we don't know yet though, whether it was these issues carried on to into the following financial year. So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
You could ask Debbie now and say it hasn't been.
Yeah, okay, right,
It hasn't been clear, but the next time we see it in the next year.
okay.
Okay. Obviously, Debbie's not here to ask, but if we take that up as a sort of action to take away and get an answer perhaps, and then we can report that back via email, I guess, or, you know, to the next meeting. Okay. There's no other questions on that. So I'll thank you for your time this evening, and we can move on. Yeah, so if we move on then to, we'll sort of move slightly backwards onto internal audit, which is item 6. I think if Max Thomas, the head of internal audit, and Connor, the assistant director of audit insurance.
5 and 6 together.
Okay. And yes, thank you. I guess if we start with item 6 and then we'll do item 5 after. So that's the way we seem to be going backwards. It's fine.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the proposed internal audit work programme for 2024-25. Members of the committee will recall that we attended the February meeting to provide our consultation report, and we sought the committee's views on potential priorities for inclusion in the work programme. Since then, we've met with officers across the council to understand their ideas of risks and areas of concern that potentially needed to be factored into the internal audit work programme. So that's been happening over the last 2 months. That's culminated in the production of this proposed work programme for 2024-25. A key feature of this programme is that it needs to, as a whole, allow us to arrive at an opinion on the council's framework of risk management, governance and control. For us to be able to do that, we assess inclusions in the programme against what is known as our opinion framework. Again, that was something we discussed in the February meeting. So the upshot of that particular process of consultation, both with yourselves and with officers, is what can be found in Appendix A, which is our internal audit work programme for 2024-25. So there's an important couple of points to note about that. So it is over planned or over programmed. So we actually put in more commitments than we're able to deliver. What that means is during the year, we can respond to changes in priorities with already identified audit priorities. Now, that doesn't preclude other audits from coming in, which weren't initially identified, but it allows us to move swiftly and in an agile fashion. So that's a couple of key considerations in developing the programme. In fact, when we report to yourselves during the year on our progress reports, you will see how these audits move through our do now, do next, do later system of prioritisation as well. So you can see that plan being delivered during the year. So this juncture, on this particular part of the report, happy to receive any questions on the internal audit work programme. And then afterwards, perhaps we could take some questions on the counter fraud plan as well. Okay.
Yeah, just to note that the proposed counter fraud work programme is in Annex 2. As in previous years, the majority of the work will be reactive in nature, so that's undertaking investigations where fraud is suspected and taking cases through to an appropriate conclusion. But we will also be doing proactive work, so that's raising awareness of fraud risks across the council, making sure that the public and other agencies know who to report suspected fraud cases to. It's also updating things like the policy framework, the fraud risk assessment, taking part in the National Fraud Initiative, the data matching exercise, and acting as the single point of contact for the Department for Work and Pensions. So the range of activities. We've tried to put an estimate on the sort of proportion of time we spend on each of those activities. So there's a little pie chart sort of with that sort of breakdown at time. So that's the counter fraud work programme.
Okay, thank you. And we're being asked to approve the internal audit work programme and just to note the proposed counter fraud programme. So I guess just bearing that in mind in terms of the questions that councillors might have, but if anybody does have any questions or issues they'd like to raise.
Can I ask a one based on today's events? And I'm not talking about Vennels. It's keeping spare capacity for whatever may come out of an election due to be held in July, with the bulk of the financial year still to follow on from that. Whether there ought to be some almost advanced built-in slack, because it's likely to cause you, I would have thought, along with the rest of the council, some kind of organisational issues.
Okay, I mean, the nature of our sort of operating practices is very flexible. So we both internal audit and counter fraud, those work programmes are indicative in nature. We will keep them under review and we'll change them if needs be in consultation with council officers.
Okay. Any further questions, Councillor Melly?
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering on page 90, where it says potential internal audit activity, on the list it says equalities. I was just wondering what an internal audit of equalities would be. Would it be whether the council is meeting its legal requirements, or would it be assessing whether it's hitting, internal targets or achieving its strategies? Like what does equalities mean?
Public sector equality duties. It could be in recruitment, it could be, and then in continued employment, could be in decision making as well. At this point in time, the exact precise scope of the audit would be for consultation with the particular relevant officers. I have actually had conversations since this was produced, and I know there's a lot of work ongoing in that area. So it might be one of those ones that's programmed in as a do later with a view to checking in and seeing what progress is being made. But if it were to be in the plan as is stated now, it would be, looking at, recruitment, actions in employment, and then, quality impact assessments and how decisions are taken.
Okay, thanks. And I had a similar question about carbon reduction / adaptation and what an audit of that would be.
Yeah, another good question. So this is actually quite a new area for internal audit as a profession to get to grips with. Obviously, number of councils over a number of years have declared climate emergencies. So this is really the professionals' response to that, and being a bit more involved tends to just be the fundamentals, i.e. if there are ambitions that are set out in some sort of plan or strategy for delivering carbon adaptation and reduction, which there are, what's the governance around that? So how can we confirm that those actions are being taken, and that any progress against those actions is monitored and escalated where it needs to be, and ultimately happening, which we would then verify through audit procedures. So it's very much a what are your intentions, how our arrangements set up to deliver on those intentions, and ultimately are they doing what they should be?
Okay, obviously there's a few sections in terms of how you sort of prioritise the work sort of programme over the year. Is the sort of list in any kind of prioritisation order in there, or is this kind of everything that is considered in no particular order? Or has this kind of been through that filter of the do now, do later, and therefore savings plans is top of the list to do first, or is it?
Yeah, so behind the scenes, when we develop this, we do have our do now, do next, do later prioritization applied to that. You don't necessarily see that at this point in time because best laid plans, sometimes things change, but we have our indications of where we want to try and go first, bearing in mind those prioritization factors. So yes, you can be assured that behind the scenes there is the do now, do next, do later. The order in which they appear isn't sort of indicative of that. We've tried to group them into similar areas in terms of thematically within each section, but there's no indication from the order in which they appear in the programme to suggest whether or not the do now, do next, do later. The first time you will see that is when we come to yourselves in July and we say, here's what we've delivered for the previous year and here's our intentions for current work going forward as part of progress reporting.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? If not, we're happy to approve the that plan as it is. I've seen nods, I think we're happy. And then just in terms of the counter fraud section as well, just if there are any particular questions on that. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, on page 57.15, it talks about how you haven't defined high, medium, and low risk intentionally, which I'm surprisingly for someone with a background in risk management very happy with, because I think sometimes when you multiply scores out, the risk ends up with weird numbers that aren't genuine, and having a bit more of a subjective take on it makes sense. However, in the fraud risk assessment on Appendix B, page 63 onwards, there are 3 risks that are still classed as high after mitigation. And the risk controls in place basically say, well, human error exists still, and therefore it's still high risk because the value is high and we can't eliminate it. So on all 3 of those, I can't spot anything that you've listed in the paper that says, here's something more we would recommend. I just wanted to get a verbal, do you think we've done everything we can, even though the risk still stays high? Is there more that we should be investigating? I know that there's stuff in the action plan around whistleblowing, etc. Is there more things that we haven't done that we could do on those 3 particular risks? Sorry, so the 3 risks are the top 3 on Appendix B, page 63 onwards. So it's adult social care fraud, the creditor fraud, and the cybercrime are still marked as residual risk high. And all 3 have some priorities around raising awareness and stuff, but whether anything, could it ever be the medium? Are there other councils that do it better than us? What does high mean compared to other highs, right? That's kind of my question.
Okay, we've actually moved on to item 5 now, but we'll. Is that okay?
I think that is item 5, isn't it?
Yeah, but we were item 6, the counter fraud work.
Sorry, I thought. Oh, sorry. Hang on. Which agenda item are we on? I thought we would move on to that one. Is that incorrect?
I have to move on to. Well, previous one was right.
Sorry, my bad. I genuinely thought we had moved on to that item. Had we not?
There's a counter fraud work programme as part of the item 5, and
I think I dismissed those.
yeah.
Apologies. I thought we moved on to item 5. Everybody else thinks we've moved on to item 5.
Okay. Regardless, if people are happy for me to ask that question and sit with it, then we can move on from there, but.
Can I just present item?
Yeah.
Just introduce the report and then I'll try and answer the question if I can. So, yeah, this report just sets out the results of our annual review of the council's counter fraud framework. Annex 1 provides details of sort of key national developments and also hopefully gives you an indication of the sort of local picture in terms of counter fraud. One thing to note, we are seeing an ongoing increase year on year in the number of referrals we're receiving. So we had a 20% increase in 23-24 compared to the previous year. We have previously brought updates to the counter fraud framework to this committee. We don't consider there's any changes required at this point in time. So in terms of the report, we've got there's two elements to it. First of all, the counter fraud development plan in Appendix A, which sets out half a dozen particular actions that we're going to work on this year, and then the results of the fraud risk assessment, and that's set out in Appendix B. And the fraud risk assessment is the process that we go through, which helps us determine where to prioritise most of our work. So what we've done is attempted to identify where the sort of greatest fraud risks are. Now, as you've identified, those are adult social care, creditor fraud, and cybercrime. So those were the highest risks last year. They've been the highest risks for a number of years, and I suspect if you looked at other councils, they would be the same risks there. They are areas where, unfortunately, there's no amount of investment the council can make to fully mitigate the risks. There's just residual risk within those three areas. You only need to get one or two cases in adult social care, for example, and the values are quite significant. Cybercrime, every public authority is at risk. It's more a case of when it's going to happen, not if it's going to happen. There are almost every week there's news stories. So you may have seen Leicester City Council was attacked a few weeks ago. It is almost inevitable that at some point this council, but every council is going to have issues there. So there's nothing, whatever we do, and we try our best, the council is never going to be able to mitigate risks in those areas.
Chair, these are examples where the probability is 100%. The scale is the only annual variable that you have. Is there any way of reporting it to say, look, here is this clump of inevitable problems, but the probability of it being a very high number any 1 year is about the only thing you can modify, if you're lucky in some cases, but there can never be an impression you can stop it or prevent it, and it will always be a high risk. The difficulty is getting the feel of the range of scale in any 1 year. I'd have guessed.
It tells us as the counter fraud resource within the council is that the limited resource we've got available to us has to be prioritised to these areas, and that's what we do. And we try to set out, summarise the actions we're taking in each of those areas to try and limit both the probability but also the impact.
Okay, Councillor Rose.
I'll try and phrase my question a bit more cleanly and in context. Certainly true, you can't eliminate these risks. I totally appreciate that, and they remain high. My question is, to what extent have we done everything that we can do as a council to mitigate them? You know, as you say, you can only try your best. Are we trying our best? And most of the actions in terms of the priorities against them are listed as basically make staff eternally vigilant about it. And that's about the best we can do. But there are things in there, some stuff around ransomware, whaling, DDoS attacks and stuff, that some of that is about, that's specifically cybercrime, but there are things you can do technologically to prevent some of this. You can do some actions that aren't just staff training. So I just wanted to get your steer on, do you think we've done everything every other council has? Are there councils out there that do more? Is it about just pouring more money in and hoping for the best, and actually it doesn't really impact risk, or just beyond the high, as much as we can in our power, resolve it, so we're doing everything we can?
I'm cautious in nature, so I'm reluctant to say we've done everything possible that we can, but I genuinely believe that we've taken every step that we think is reasonably possible to address the risks. Compared to other councils, I suspect we're in a much better place, because I don't think all councils necessarily have the dedicated resource that this council has, and therefore the ability to put in place these measures. And you can see that by the fact that some councils are falling victim.
Okay, Councillor Burton.
I wondered also about quantities that you're able to recover when you're doing this. Is that's not something that's ever in a report as such? And then I have another question as well.
We do report on the level of fraud recovery for the council. So it's not in this report, but when you see the annual report to the July meeting, that will include details of the amount of fraud that we've prevented, but also actually recovered. So from memory, the target is £200,000 worth of fraud recovery in the year. We tend to exceed that. So that's the return on the investment that the council's making. Part of the return. The other part of the return is that it's helping to prevent fraud occurring. So it's
okay. Another question.
Somebody who lives in my ward pointed out that there were an awful lot of council tax and business rates owing on what was to be the Roman quarter. And I wonder, the risks involved in that sort of thing happening when a development goes under. Is that something you're looking at?
Is that people not paying?
I presume so.
Right.
Yes,
Well,
yeah.
That's sort of not really.
That's
within
not
our
your, that's
remit,
out of your remit, yes.
But clearly, if people are trying to avoid council tax liability or business rate liability, then that is of interest.
That's what. Sorry, I'm really.
So people are. If people are just trying to, well, they're not paying their business rates or their council tax. That's the council's revenues team's responsibility.
Right.
If people are, I don't know, applying for discounts that they're not entitled to, or they're running businesses and they're not declaring them, then that is of interest.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the training and the regularity attached to this. I understand that it's mentioned throughout about how staff are regularly brought up to date with what these frauds are, what the risk of fraud are, and how to deal with them. And presumably training takes sort of an evolutionary process as well, as more fraud and different forms of risk come forward, staff are trained. Would you be able to tell me at all about sort of the regularity with which that takes place?
Well, it is an ongoing process. The training tends to be targeted to the teams that are of most relevance. So the creditors team, housing, and so on. In terms of the actual numbers of courses and how that's actually been delivered, I'll probably need to come back to you with that sort of detail.
Thank you. And just on that, I understand due to the stretched nature of resources, we have to train the teams that are most likely to encounter these sorts of risks and this issue around fraud. Is that in and of itself a risk that fraudsters, people who are going to cause problems, will be able to identify weak spots within the council if there are areas where, for example, if we put a lot of effort into training the social care team and at the expense of, as a hypothetical example, the team that deals with council tax? I don't think that's necessarily the case, but is there an issue there with, does that emerge in itself as a risk, the sort of the patchwork nature of it?
We do provide general training, and it's mostly done through e-learning and just general messaging. We're often running campaigns that try to raise the profile of fraud and the risks around it. So we're doing as much as we can to provide more general awareness, raise awareness. But clearly the most of the training is targeted.
Councillor Melly?
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about this polygamous working. This is type of fraud I hadn't heard about before. It was interesting to read about. Is that not detectable through tax codes? And is that not quite an easy type of fraud to detect?
That's a good question, actually. It's become an issue. We've become more aware of it, and employers have become more aware of it. And I've actually encountered, not in this council, another council where it was actually detected. Yes, without knowing the individual details, I would have thought, yes, the tax codes would identify that. It's possible that the income has been properly declared and there's everything in it, but it's just not picked up as an issue by HMRC. As long as they're getting the tax in, I don't know is the answer, but it is happening, and there's been more than one case actually.
I suppose the tax aspect will come quite a long time after, because your self-assessment, for example, can be 18 months after the end of
If
it.
you're employed by two employers rather than contracting, then CYC as an employer will be told by HMRC how much of the tax-free allowance is from this job and how much is from other work.
I guess
So if HR is told this person's tax code, they only get half of their tax-free allowance from this job, you know that they're doing another job.
Just thinking about the 5 different jobs I've got and how they all interact, and I'm not sure that's how it works for me, but maybe. Yeah.
The case I'm aware of, that these people were appointed as interims, so they were acting as interims in different organisations. They were self-employed. It probably wasn't being detected as a result, but whether that's the common feature, I don't know.
Okay, Councillor Fisher, do you have a supplementary?
No, it's just a point. I've become aware of 2 cases through another associate I have who was come across this situation, and in each case they were taking money cash in hand, so it never appeared in the tax system ever. They were just literally doing jobs on the side and taking money. It just doesn't occur through the tax system. It's very, very difficult to detect unless something goes wrong and somebody who, for example, they've been working for mentioned it to somebody who mentions it to somebody else in the system, and it gets back, and then that's how it gets.
Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I was just going to add the same point that from my understanding and what I'm aware of, it's situations where you aren't on a salaried full-time role, but you're in a 3-month temporary interim role, or you're doing a subcontractor, or you're taking cash in hand, or your combinations of those things. So technically you get paid. Technically, yes, you pay tax afterwards. It catches up with you eventually. But each of those contracts never spots there's anything wrong, and you're only doing half the job for them, and you kind of have that perpetual fraud from that approach. But if we're not paying our staff cash in hand and we're not relying on agency workers that are from unvetted agencies, and all of those things should tighten up that fraud, broadly speaking.
Okay. Councillor Burton.
I noticed as well that it said working from home had made that easier on page 65. is that because you can't physically see people, basically? And yeah, I mean, how big a problem is it then, really?
Well, we've only really become aware of it in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's since COVID, and it obviously people being able to work from home is a contributory factor.
Do you know how large a problem it is?
It's just being highlighted. So there's a number of cases, but small numbers, but there might be more. That's, I think, it's because people have started to become aware of it.
Okay. And just page 55, paragraph 8, it says the counter fraud team will be piloting a new compliance system. I don't know, are you able to say anything more about what that system sort of entails? Is it a new system, as in it's a new process, or a new way of thinking about it? Is a new system, as in it's a new different computer system or something?
It's a new process. It hasn't really been developed. It's still more the sort of conceptual point. It is really aimed at, we get, I don't know, 400 referrals a year. A large proportion of those will be quite low value cases, and it's a way of dealing with those in a different way to the way we've been doing them previously, just to enable us to free up some resource to spend on the higher value cases. I think perhaps if we come back, perhaps the next meeting, once we've got the process better developed, and we can go through it with the committee.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful to understand that a bit better. If there's no further questions or issues, we're happy to note the report. I'll thank you for your time this evening again, and see you next time. We go. I'm tempted to go forward to item, but if we go back to item 4, which is item 4, if yeah, Lorraine wanted.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, committee members. As you know, my name's Lorraine Lunt. I'm the Council's Information Governance and Complaints and Feedback, Records Manager, DPO, all things covert surveillance, CCTV, etc. Manager. I'll keep my report verbal update to you short and brief this evening, because as you may know, it was brought forward from July, so the report isn't as meaty as you would be expected to see in July timescales. However, just to pull out some broad brush highlights for you, as we've set out, the performance report and data sets that you'll see going forward will look slightly different. I have taken on board the comments made in February to put back in the percentage of in-time complaints and compliments, etc., and previous comments that has been made through this committee. So the beefed up year-end report that you will see later on this year will have all those key performance indicators back in for yourselves. Ideally, the information will all be available at that time and validated and will add up correctly. But as you may have seen from the note at the annex, I've tried to explain why there are sometimes discrepancies between what may have been on a November report to February's report for a preceding quarter. And that's usually because during the time period of the quarter running, we will have received cases, but they may not have reached their timescale for response. And by the time I do the next quarter response, those timescales have passed, so I can revalidate and recheck and reissue those figures. Sometimes it is that through chasing up and follow-up work that we do across the council, we get copied into responses later than what should have happened in the process. we're working on making sure that reduces. The work with the ICO enforcement notice on FOIs helped support and reduce that further. So that was just a short explanation on why the actual performance report still looks a bit short and not as meaty as you're used to seeing. The other thing is that there is a continuous and sustained improvement in both FOI, EIR and subject access request in-time performance. There's been an increase in the number of complaints received and dealt with under children's social care and a decrease in the number received and dealt with through adult social care. This is influenced by a number of factors, increased demand on restrictions and current budget and financial circumstances, etc. Moving on to the ICO, there's been no decision notices since the preceding report to this committee, and that means that whilst they may have been investigating and had cases and looked at our responses to FOIs and EIRs, they've found no decisions against us and have not published those on their website. There has been, since the last report, 14 local government and social care ombudsman cases. 3 were closed after initial inquiries, another 3 out of jurisdiction, 5 not upheld, 1 premature, i.e. they'd went to the ombudsman too soon and hadn't exhausted our process, and 2 were upheld with fault and injustice. And those details, remedies and actions are detailed in Annex 2. And I can confirm that all the actions and remedies have been completed within the timescale set by the Ombudsman. The last bit, Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, it's not got the fanfare and the news and the impetus that it had of GDPR in 2018, for those of you that remember that, but I thought it would be interesting and starting to put forward the high level changes that may happen, that you may be aware of, that you may have started to see. The aim is that hopefully, although there has been the news released this afternoon, that it would be passed and start to be enforced before the general election. That may still happen because it's expected to be passed in May. So over to everybody for questions.
Okay, thank you. If there are any questions, Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. In Annex 2, the summary of ombuds cases, in the column saying date of actions completed, once it's marked off as completed, does that then mean no one goes back to check again that anything has been completed? Well, so the reason I'm asking is because the one on page 41, the place waste upheld and injustice case, one of the actions is to ensure that there's in-cab prompts for 3 months from the date of decision, and that's marked off as done and completed, but it's been less than 3 months since the date of the decision. So if it's marked off as done, does that mean no one's going to go back and check that it actually was done? Or
so the actions were completed within the timescales, but that doesn't mean that we don't go back, and the Ombudsman won't issue a remedy satisfaction until you can provide evidence that those actions have all been completed. So at the end of the 3, if they've set a timescale, we will go back. We're actually just made a little pencil note. We are still searching for the evidence and getting the evidence back from the service area that the reminders are done, but also that they are ongoing, because at a point in time, the Ombudsman themselves will come back and ask for proof that all the actions have been done and are continuing to make a difference. That's okay.
Councillor Rose and then Councillor Mason.
Yeah, thank you for the report as always, and you know, never pleasant to read the individual cases where there have been issues, but really positive reading all round. Always hard when we were looking in February at one spike in numbers, but 93% looking like it's a bit of a more stable new normal on FOIs and SARs is really positive. But it's always easy for us as humans to spot patterns in things where there may not be patterns there. And so with that, it looks really positive. With the number of corporate complaints and some of those numbers, it looks really random. And if it's, 6 to 11, as it has been with child social care complaints, you can kind of excuse data variances, but the gap from 170 to 480 fluctuating back and forth. I just really wanted to get your best subjective opinion on, is this seasonal habits of the people making the complaints? Is that seasonal behaviour and cultures of the council? what drives the fact that it can be triple for one quarter than it is for another quarter? Because they're not more small variations on some of those numbers of comments, numbers of complaints, numbers of compliments, etc. Hard question, sorry, but
It is a hard question, but what I can say is all of what you've just stated will impact on the number of cases that we receive through the complaints, comments, concerns or compliments process. The dip in Q3, we do tend to see a dip usually trending in that respect, because we get to and apologies to my colleagues in waste, we're getting to the end of the green waste bin service. So that does impact on that. It was also the quarter that we introduced our new case management system, and it's not that any cases were lost or not recorded. It was just being recorded in a slightly different way, and we've been able to identify that and resolve that, but can confirm that that is still the number of cases. The other bit is that there are trends depending on what happens in the local community and the wider community, what people are feeling aggrieved about. They can be influenced in factors from community groups and or media, what's been happening there. But usually that dip in Q3 is that we're coming to the end of the green waste collection process.
one quick supplementary, what percentage of the complaints are related to green waste over the rest of the year then, if we're talking 200 per quarter difference? Is that reason that we've got 200 more because half of all of our complaints are about green waste, or am I misinterpreting what you're saying as more significant it is?
Not misinterpreting, but it may be that there is a high percentage of bin complaints, missed collections, and that goes through from all the different types of waste containers and collections that they do. And the nature of the reason that there's a lot of complaints is they hit every household across the whole city, at least once a week, if not more. So there is a high number in volume percentage wise for that, and it's also around the assisted and medical collections as well. I can and will do in the annual complaints report that goes to the other scrutiny first before you get it, which is booked in for November this year. We report on those analysis, the drill down into the types, percentages across all the different services, and you start to see where there is a higher volume of cases received, but it's usually in those services that hit a lot of the whole community all the time, every week. But yes, it's in the annual complaints report.
One final very tiny question, which is, and we had a couple of issues with Saturday collections of recycling over Christmas, etc. Are they all counted against January, even if they were Christmas week complaints? Would they all have been picked up and then logged and counted against January stats? Do you happen to know?
It'll be recorded on the date that we received them, so they'll be in that Q4, January to March.
I've got Councillor Mason and then.
Thanks. I'm just interested in those two complaints where injustice was found. What it says about the investigators, and I presume that's different then to your department, because it says remind those involved in statutory children's complaint investigators. Does that mean they're not part of your normal team? And then two, it says obviously paying out compensation for significant delays. Just some more background about that, basically.
So you're referring to the one on page 39 where the comment was the investigation was thorough and evidence-based, but there's still some outstanding personal justice. So that where there was investigations and investigating officers. The council team, the complaints advisors, given their capacity, will do children's social care investigations. However, that due to the nature and complexity and sometimes the number that we receive in, as I only have 2.5 FTE complaints advisors, we do have independent investigators through a contract, and it's usually linked to the requirement under children's social care legislation to also provide what's called an independent person or an independent people, and it's through that same company that the investigators are used. So it can be either my team or the people that provide the independent people.
And I suppose what's the balance then between saying it's got to be a thorough investigation and saying it's got a significant delay? Where do you, how do you draw that line? Because obviously clearly one half says, you know, it was a thorough and prolonged investigation, but then the other half says, we realised it took too long, so we had to make a payment.
That's the Ombudsman's caseworkers' comments, and unfortunately, I don't know what their benchmark thing to would be to distinguish between when it's thorough and the time taken. What I can say is that there are expectations set out in the legislation on how long an investigation should take, and if you do start to go outside that, even if you have had to do an investigation panel, etc., before you go to the final stage, it can make it quite a lengthy process for the complainant and the rest of the people involved. But yes, that would be the Ombudsman's investigators' comments.
The other one, whether it's injustice. I mean, you're saying about waste being a big source of complaints, and actually this is a complaint I've seen over and over again in terms of from residents about assisted waste collections in particular. I suppose I mean, if they all wrote to the Ombudsman, they could all get some cash, but at what point, I suppose, does it really get picked up as a really big strategic issue that something is just totally going wrong? Because, like I said, to read it there as getting to that level and there's having to pay out, and just given the fact that the emails I've seen in my ward highlighting those, I suppose at what point does that trigger something internally if we're feeding complaints? Because normally I suppose we'd feed them straight into the waste team, opposed to your team. You know, we'd be saying to James or whoever else, you know, this is becoming a problem now. Can someone sort it out?
So that's part of the lessons learned and the action planning that we take from learning from complaints. When you go straight to the service area, they will let us know and we will add them in because all the figures and all the learning adds to the strength or not of the case of looking at doing something, and is there something that can be changed. I'm a great believer as well in the complaints is free feedback and consultation on your processes and should be included in decision making when you're looking at policies and strategies, which is what the heads of service and the directors in that area will look at. The level of complaints, the number of complaints. They do look at their processes. They do try and change their process where they can within their policy and the guidance and the strategies. And we can, it's the area that we work most closely with on a most regular basis. And yes, we do keep feeding that lessons learned through. Is it time to look at doing something differently? The bit about the missed assisted collections, they've looked at how they work with the crew members and make sure that those updates to them, which goes back to the following it up and making sure those crew reminders are happening on a timely basis, so that we hope to see a reduction in the number of these types of complaints, especially escalating to the Ombudsman.
Okay. It's a follow-up on Councillor Rose's question, really, which is if you've got a line called corporate and courts complaints, and within that you've got one particular kind of activity, which is going up and down like a yo-yo, it means you know nothing else about anything else which is in that line, because it's being totally, you've been blindsided by that one number. I don't know what else is in there. I now know that bins are a big issue because they jump a lot. There might be something else in there which is a significant issue, but it's all hidden in that one number. Should it be divided out in some way?
So as I've explained and put into the report, this is not the full KPI data that you are used to seeing at this committee, and that drill down is usually available. It's just unfortunate with the configuration and the time and the resource within my team, we haven't yet finished that configuration and build. For those of you who recall the 2+ reports ago, the lines of information that you see in the performance data usually goes on to about 3 or 4 pages, and that drill down is there. And I can only apologise that it's not been available in the last 2 reports.
And I guess when would be the next time, sorry, that would be?
I'm not sure what next timing of my next report is. Bear in mind, this has been brought forward from July. I don't know yet from the work plan if I'm on in July again or later on in the year. However, that full drill down is in the annual complaints report that goes to, I know it's not to yourselves and you need to see it on a regular basis to identify any issues, etc. But the annual complaint report is in November to scrutiny.
The current timeline is, it says September as the next one, and then January after that, but it doesn't have the annual in there slotted. So I guess if it's going elsewhere in November, that is the one that comes to January. But yeah, I've got the report up in front of me as well with all of the rows in from the November 2023 meeting, which is on page 39 of that, or page 35, sorry, to use the real numbers. I can't see necessarily the exact breakdown we're talking about here in terms of being able to extract that and see what the numbers are without it. So it might be worth us looking at in the context of September's report when it comes through, rather than taking it offline. But yeah, I appreciate this is a cut down version of the data.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, the full drill down, and then it's the timing of the report going to scrutiny that you don't see it in September before it goes there, unfortunately. But yes, I will make sure that in the next report that there is the drill down that you've stated and where we can get that off the KPI machine, etc.
Okay, I can't see any further questions at that point, so I think we're just noting the report, so I'll thank you for your time this evening. We move back then to item 8, which is the 24-25 work plan. I don't think there's a covering report or anything. It's just, I guess, whether there's any items that is particularly worth drawing to our attention, sort of moving around, or if there's
I think if I can share, the obvious one is currently scheduled for the 9th of July meeting is the report on the Salvation Army's contract and the natural expiry of that. It is scheduled for the 9th of July at the moment. We will endeavour to do our best to reach that. But in part, the announcement of a general election may throw something of this banner in the works, because obviously most of the people who are working on this are also going to be involved, but we're in there. But in addition, just by the process that we need to go through to make sure that it's followed due internal process and has met with the expectations that were raised with the Salvation Army in advance of the preparation of the last report. If we need to slip it to the 31st of July, we'll have to do that, just to ensure that it's actually right and we've gone through the proper process.
okay. I mean, obviously the 31st of July meeting is getting very long. I suppose it would be useful to get an idea of how the election might sort of affect things at the July meeting, because there's a number of other, I guess, the constitution review as well. I guess you're not able to say at the moment, but it might be.
Seriously, I mean, the constitution review, there is certainly one item that we can bring back to that meeting, because we spent an extensive amount of time, as I'm sure the committee would agree, on the council procedure rules. That is probably the most significant document that we need to think about in any event. So I can certainly bring that back to the 9th of July meeting. And that in and of itself may spark a degree of discussion at the meeting, which will probably be quite useful for all concerned.
I guess, is there anything that could be moved forward from the 31st?
We will certainly look to see.
We move stuff back to make space for the Salvation Army, I guess.
Yeah, I think ultimately what would happen, Chair, is that in the event that the Salvation Army report can't be brought, we'll shuffle things around so that we'll bring reports forwards, as we did tonight with the corporate governance report, to ensure that we're not just calling a meeting to deal with 2 or 3 small things.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm sure we're all very keen that that's given a high priority, but also appreciate going to have a busy 6 weeks. Councillor Rose?
Yeah, I guess to call out the 31st of July, the update on members training and the York Open Data Platform were originally May on the work plan way back when. So probably are things that could potentially be moved back forward if the Salvation Army report isn't available on time. I do agree that the Constitution review and the Salvation Army contract are probably a meeting on themselves if they do both land. I guess the other thing to note is I don't look at my emails during meetings, but if I get a flurry of cancelled event invites, I spot them. It's probably worth the Constitution Working Group, whether they meet or not, just having a scrutiny of, is this in a position where it can come forward for vote and go to full council, or are there still some references to old text in other bits of the document that might need tidying up? So, but for me, definitely that update on the constitution review can definitely come through and get voted through and go to full council in July, which I think is in everyone's best interest to tidy up where we're at today.
I think the observation I would make is certainly the update on member training may be more challenging because of the election, because Lindsay Tomlinson, who is one of the co-authors listed on there, will be absolutely up to her eyeballs with the election until the 5th of July. She's she spent the last 3 hours trying to organise various bits and pieces whilst getting ready for a Bruce Springsteen concert while being on leave. So she's just thrown herself into it as elections people tend to. But we will certainly make sure that the 9th of July meeting is not shall we say, a lame duck.
Okay.
Chair, and just to raise the thing that I mentioned at the beginning, that at some stage there'll be a report from Brain about governance, which brings in the issues that I circulated to everyone for this meeting. Because I would like to get it formally as having been regurgitated by me.
And that's probably something else that would be suitable for the 9th of July.
Yeah, and I suppose it fits relatively well with other things on them. Okay, no other comments?
Only the thing was that there was the mention of the annual corporate governance report. If it's one of the ones already on there and it isn't currently scheduled for November, but November was mentioned, then maybe just put the word annual on there just to flag it. If it is a November extra one, then that can be slotted in, but just to capture for the minutes, really, more than anything else.
Yeah. Yes, and I suppose it's worth noting as well, we did mention at our briefing, as perhaps a training event before one of these meetings on the, I think it was on the Treasury, was it Treasury Management? A lot's happened since yesterday. But trying to perhaps have a couple of more sort of training things so we go into meetings with a bit more of an idea of what exactly it is we're being asked for, what we're looking for, in particular in the papers, because when we're presented with several hundred pages, it can be difficult sometimes to know exactly what we're picking out. So a bit of a look at that. And I think we've asked as well for a sort of private meeting without sort of members of the public or officers with the auditors, just so we can sort of assure ourselves, I guess, that there's no issues that they'd sort of like to raise or would be useful to in that sort of forum. So we'll try and schedule that as well before one of the sort of an appropriate meeting at some point in the future. And then perhaps if that once a year or something to just give us an opportunity to ask them if there's anything they'd like to say without anybody else sort of watching. Yeah, if there's no other issues on that. No? Okay. So I think now we're just on to urgent business, and I've not been notified of any, so I'll close the meeting. Thank you everybody for their time.